Lena had traveled to dozens of alien worlds during her work with the Galactic Research Division, but she had never set foot on a planet that felt so alive and so dangerous at the same time. The jungle stretched endlessly in all directions, a dense ocean of green where towering trees with spiral trunks reached so high they seemed to pierce the low misty clouds. The air was thick and warm, carrying the scent of wet soil and strange flowers, and somewhere, deep within that maze of vines and shadow, something was watching every step she took. She could feel it, even if she could not yet see it. The mission was simple in theory: catalog the wildlife, collect samples, and map the terrain for the Council archives, but every crew member had been given the same warning before departure. This planet had an apex predator, one so efficient and lethal that even the most advanced defense drones had failed to bring one down. It was a beast that ruled the food chain with unquestioned dominance. The locals called it the Ridgeback for the jagged line of armored plates along its spine. The Council classified it simply as Class Omega, and the briefing files were filled with blurry images, claw marks, and rock carcasses stripped clean, and reports that always ended abruptly. Lena was not a soldier. She was a xenobiologist. Her tools were scanners, not weapons. Her escort for this trip was a tall insectoid alien named Ravs, a quiet being whose chitinous skin glistened in the humid air. They moved slowly down a narrow path, hacking through vines with a plasma machete, as Lena stopped often to scan new species of plants or record animal calls. Overhead, tiny creatures with translucent wings darted between branches like living shards of glass, but below, in the undergrowth, the silence was unnerving. The first sign that something was wrong came as a change in the jungle itself. The usual chorus of chirps and hums faded into nothing. Leaves no longer rustled under the breeze. The air felt heavier, and Lena's steps slowed without thinking. She glanced at Ravs, who stood motionless, antennae raised, his black eyes scanning the shadows. Then came the sound, low and deep like distant thunder, but with a rhythm to it. Heavy footfalls approaching. Before she could react, the Ridgeback emerged from the foliage with terrifying grace. It was larger than she had imagined, muscles rippling under scales the size of her hand. Its 6 limbs moved with a predator's balance, claws curving like blades, and a head shaped for nothing but killing eyes locked on them with a focus that froze her in place. Every instinct screamed to run, but her legs refused to obey. Ravs moved to stand between her and the beast, mandibles clicking as he raised his weapon. But there was a flicker of doubt in his stance. The Ridgeback lowered itself, muscles tensing the moment before the strike. Then from behind Lena, a voice spoke, calm and almost bored. Hold position. It said. She turned sharply and saw him, a man dressed in dark, worn gear, standing in the middle of the path. No helmet, no heavy armor, just a long curved blade hanging at his side. His stance was relaxed, yet somehow ready, his gaze fixed on the predator, as if it were nothing more than a puzzle to solve. Lena's mind stumbled over the impossibility. Humans were not supposed to be here. This was a restricted sector, and even if one had made it, why would he step in front of a Class Omega predator with no ranged weapon? The Ridgeback snarled, a sound that made her bones vibrate, but the man did not flinch. Instead, he took a slow step forward, tilting his head slightly, as if studying the exact moment the beast's weight shifted. Ravs barked a warning in his native clicks and hisses, telling the man to fall back, but the human ignored him in a movement so subtle Lena almost missed it. His hand slid to the hilt of the blade. The predator took a step closer, its claws sinking into the soft ground, its tail sweeping slowly from side to side. The air between them felt charged like the moment before lightning strikes. Lena felt her breath catch, unsure if she was about to witness an act of bravery or the quickest death she had ever seen. The man spoke again, this time only a single word come. It was not shouted or forced, but steady, as if he knew the Ridgeback would obey in a way it did, lowering its head. Before lunging forward, the sudden explosion of movement broke Lena's trance. She stumbled backward, colliding with a thick vine, but her eyes never left the scene ahead. The predator's speed was incredible, yet the man's reaction was faster. His body shifted, Just enough to let the first strike pass harmlessly to the side. His blade did not yet move. His feet slid over the ground light. And precise like a dancer's, Lena could feel her pulse in her throat. Ref's weapon hummed as he prepared to fire. But even he hesitated. There was something in the man's composure that suggested interference would be pointless or maybe dangerous. For them all, the predator circled, claws tearing shallow grooves in the earth, testing this strange prey, and still the man stood. Unshaken, eyes sharp, calculating. Lena realized with a mix of fear and fascination that he was not here to survive the Ridgeback. He was here to kill it, and he had no doubt he could. The Ridgeback roared again, louder this time, leaves and dust shaking loose from the trees. Above, its muscles bunched, and in the next instant, it lunged once more, but the man moved like water flowing around the attack, his body low, and his hand finally drawing the blade in a single smooth motion. The metal caught, the dim light filtering through the canopy, and Lena thought she saw something in his eyes change, a cold focus sharper than the edge he carried, and then it was over. Almost before it began, the predator pulled back, snarling, but there was a thin red line along one of its forelimbs, shallow yet clean. The man had marked it not as a warning, but as a calculation, measuring the cut. Seeing how deep he could go, Lena's breath came quicker, and her mind wrestled with the reality before her. She had seen soldiers in powered armor fall to creatures half the size. She had seen heavy weapons barely scratch the scales of an apex predator, and yet here stood a human with nothing but a blade, already beginning to take it apart piece by piece in his mind. She did not know his name or why he was here, but she knew one thing with sudden clarity: she was witnessing something that should not be possible, and it was only just beginning. The Ridgeback shifted its stance, the earth under its claws breaking apart with the weight of its body. Its armored plates rose and fell with each slow breath, steam curling from between jagged teeth as it measured the human before it. The air seemed heavier now, filled with the musk of the beast and the distant rustle of leaves from creatures fleeing the area. Lena kept her eyes wide open, almost afraid to blink in case the moment she looked away one of them would be gone. The predator's gaze was unbroken, its focus absolute. But the man met that gaze with the same stillness and that strange, unshaken calm. The jungle felt like it was holding its own breath, waiting for the next movement. Ref stood to the side, weapon raised, but his long antennae twitched nervously. He had fought dangerous things before, but never anything like this. He knew from the briefing files that the Ridgeback was not just strong but smart. It could learn an opponent's patterns within moments. It could use the terrain as a weapon, and it had no fear once engaged. It would fight until its prey was torn apart or it was dead itself, and the thought of the human surviving seemed almost absurd. Yet here they were. The Ridgeback moved first, a slow circling motion, its head swaying side to side, and its tail dragging heavy lines in the soil. The man adjusted his footing, subtly keeping the distance the same, no matter how the predator angled itself. Lena saw the precision in his steps and how his hands were loose at his sides, the blade low but never dropping. He was reading the beast like an open book, watching for the smallest shift in weight, the quickest twitch of muscle. The predator's claws flexed deep into the dirt, and without warning, it lunged forward faster than anything that size should be able to move. Human stepped aside just enough, his shoulders turning, and his lead foot gliding backward, letting the first swipe pass close enough to slice through a hanging vine behind him. The predator's other limb followed in a backhand strike, and this time, the man raised the blade not to block, but to redirect the force. The metal edge slid along the inside of the claw, turning its path so that the beast overextended, landing off balance for only a heartbeat. But in a fight like this, a heartbeat was an eternity. Lena's breath caught as she realized she had just seen a human counter, a strike that would have cut her in half. Ref seemed equally stunned, his weapon still ready, but unused. The predator roared, frustration echoing through the trees, sending flocks of small birds scattering into the canopy. The sound carried weight and menace, and it was followed by a renewed attack. The Ridgeback was no longer testing, it was committed. Beast's movements became a storm of claws and teeth, its speed almost unnatural for its size. Each strike aimed to end the fight, but the human was always just out of reach. Weaving between attacks with precise steps and turns, the blade flashed only in small controlled arcs, cutting shallow marks into its armored hide. Lena noticed that he never struck the same place twice. His cuts were deliberate, placed at the gaps between plates or at muscle points that would weaken the creature over time. It was not a reckless assault, it was a process. Ridgeback tried to corner him, forcing him toward a thick tree trunk, but the man used it to his advantage, spinning around it so the predator's own momentum carried it forward into a collision with the heavy bark. The impact shook the ground and splintered wood, but before the beast could recover, the man stepped in close, delivering a sharp strike to the tendons behind its front limb. Not deep enough to cripple, but enough to change its stance. The predator stumbled and let out another furious cry. Lena could feel her heart pounding, her mind torn between fear and a strange awe. She had studied predators before she had seen them dominate entire ecosystems, and she had seen hunters with advanced weapons struggle to keep their ground. Yet this was different. The human's body language held no panic, no rush. It was almost as if he was in control of the fight from the start, and that control was shaping the Ridgeback's behavior. The predator was growing angry, losing the careful patience that made it so deadly. The man stepped back, letting it come at him again, each dodge leading it farther from Lena and Reth, keeping them clear of the danger. The predator's claws tore chunks of soil and roots into the air. Its tail lashed against trees, snapping them like twigs, and still the human moved as if every motion had been practiced 1,000 times. Before his breathing remained, even his grip steady. Lena felt as if she was watching a dance, not a battle. Every movement answering the other, every shift purposeful. The jungle itself seemed to fade away in that moment, her awareness narrowing to the predator's roar and the soft sound of the human's boots sliding on the earth. The clash of claw against steel rang sharp and short, not the drawn-out grind of a desperate defense, but the brief contact of precision. Lena realized he was learning the Ridgeback, just as it was trying to learn him, reading its habits, shaping its attacks toward mistakes. Another lunge came, this one lower, with the beast's jaws opening wide, the rows of teeth glistening with saliva. The man sidestepped and struck at the hinge of its jaw. The impact forced the predator's head to turn away, breaking its line of attack and drawing a bellow of pain that rattled Lena's bones. The cut was not fatal, but it was deep enough to bleed. And that blood was a dark, thick green that steamed where it touched the warm air. The Ridgeback's breathing changed, now heavier each exhale. Sharper, it was a sign of strain, Lena recognized from watching other large predators under pursuit. Its energy was not infinite, and the human was drawing the fight out, forcing it to spend that energy faster than it could recover. The thought struck her like a revelation. This was not just a fight. It was a hunt, but not the predator's hunt. This was the human's wraith. Essos met hers briefly, and she saw in his expression the same realization. The Ridgeback's attacks had slowed just enough to show the first hints of fatigue, and the man's movements shifted subtly now. Instead of avoiding entirely, he began to press back after each dodge, striking with slightly more force, each cut placed with increasing precision. The predator snarled in fury, but for the first time there was uncertainty in its stance. It had expected an easy kill and found itself bleeding and tiring. Lena could not look away. She knew the next moments would decide the outcome, and though she had feared for the human before, now she feared for the Ridgeback, because whatever limit he had been holding back was about to be broken. Ridgeback's muscles bunched as it tried once again to circle the human, its claws digging deep into the damp ground, its tail twitching in short, sharp movements that betrayed both frustration and readiness for another strike. The air was thick with the smell of churned soil and the sharp, metallic scent of the beast's own blood drifting faintly in the humid breeze. The man never looked away from it, his eyes following every twitch, every shift of its weight. His stance low and balanced like he had all the time in the world, yet there was a subtle change in him. Now his steps more forward, leaning his grip on the blade firmer as if he was done simply studying and was ready to act. Lena could feel her own breath shorten. She had been frozen in place for so long her legs ached, but she dared not move. She knew that whatever happened next would happen quickly. Reth was still nearby, his weapon raised, his alien features tense. But the moment to intervene had long passed. There was a strange pull in the way the human moved, a silent command to stand back and let him work, and even Reth, who had no reason to trust a human, obeyed that unspoken order. The ridgeback lunged again, this time with a feint, its first limb striking low before pulling back, while the second came in high, aiming for the human's head. But the man's reaction was immediate. He stepped inside the arc of the upper strike, the movement so fast Lena's eyes almost missed it. And in that space between heartbeats, his blade flashed in a tight, horizontal cut, slicing across the thinner hide between the beast's neck plates. The wound was not deep enough to kill, but it was deeper than the earlier ones. The predator bellowed, shaking its head and snapping its jaws in frustration. Jungle erupted with noise again, startled creatures leaping away from the chaos above them. A flock of winged reptiles burst from the canopy, their cries sharp and panicked. The ridgeback pressed forward, trying to overwhelm the human with sheer size and weight, forcing him back step by step, each impact of its limbs sending tremors through the ground. But instead of resisting, the man moved with the force, letting each push shift his position until suddenly the predator had driven him into open space free of the dense tree cover. It was here that his movements became sharper, his strikes aimed with a speed and accuracy that spoke of deep training. Every cut was to a place already weakened, every step placed so that the ridgeback's claws struck earth instead of flesh. Lena realized he had been guiding the fight toward this clearing from the very beginning, and now with room to move, he no longer needed to hold back. The ridgeback lunged with its jaws wide, the rows of serrated teeth closing like a trap. But the human dropped low, sliding beneath its head, his blade slashing upward. Along the underside, where the armor was thinnest, green blood splattered the air, and the beast recoiled with a roar that shook the leaves loose from nearby branches. Its tail whipped around in retaliation. But the man bent his knees and let the strike pass overhead before twisting and driving the point of his blade into the thick muscle of its hind leg. Sound it made then was not just anger, but pain, real and deep pain. Its movement faltered for a second, its balance thrown off, and in that second the man was already moving, circling behind it, his feet sure and light, his breathing still calm, his eyes fixed not on its head or claws, but on the places where its body's power came from, the joints, the tendons, the connections that let the massive predator move with speed and strength. He was breaking them one by one. Lena's pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to speak, to call out something, but the words stayed trapped in her throat. She could not interrupt this. This was more than a fight. It was like watching the craftsman at work, every movement deliberate, every action connected to the last. The ridgeback tried to turn to face him, but each time it did, he was already striking at another angle, leaving a new wound, forcing it to split its focus between attacking and defending. And slowly the balance of the fight shifted. Rith took a cautious step forward, his eyes narrowing as he watched the human's rhythm. There was something primal about it, something older than technology, older than armor and guns, the kind of battle where survival depended on nothing but the body, the mind, and the will to keep moving. The ridgeback was still the stronger creature, but its advantage was slipping with each passing moment. Beast roared again, and this time charged without finesse, a straight, unstoppable rush that tore a deep path through the clearing, its claws raised high. The man did not step aside immediately. Instead, he waited until the last possible moment, then spun on his heel, letting the predator's own momentum carry it past him as his blade swept across the back of its forelimb, the cut so precise that Lena saw the muscle fibers parting. The ridgeback stumbled hard, nearly collapsing onto its front knees before catching itself. The human pressed forward now, not giving it a chance to recover. His blade moved faster than before, each strike flowing into the next like water over stone. The ridgeback tried to swipe at him with its tail, but he ducked under it using the movement to launch himself upward, striking at the side of its neck, where the armored plates met the softer skin. His landing was light-controlled, and he turned immediately to face it again, ready for the next exchange. The predator's breathing had grown ragged, its once fluid movements now jerky, its tail swinging slower, its claws not striking as cleanly. Lena could see the toll of the fight written in every motion, the cuts along its body, the slight limp in its hind leg, the tilt of its head to keep weight off the injured side. The human had been carving away its strength from the start, and now the damage was adding up in ways the beast could not ignore. Still, it was an apex predator, and even cornered, it would fight with everything it had. It lunged again, mouth wide, its roar deafening. But the man stepped inside its reach, his blade plunging into the joint of its forelimb, twisting sharply before pulling free. The ridgeback screamed, thrashing in agony, its movement wild and uncontrolled. Its power still dangerous, but no longer precise. Lena felt a chill run through her as she realized the human's intent. He was preparing for something final, something decisive. He had tested its speed, cut its armor, weakened its legs, and now all that was left was to end it. And from the way he straightened his stance, blade held low and ready, she knew that moment was close. Ridgeback's chest rose and fell in heavy bursts, its deep green blood streaking the torn earth around it. Its claws scraped furrows in the ground as it tried to keep its stance, but the tremor in its legs betrayed its failing strength. The man's eyes stayed locked on the beast, reading every faltering movement the way a hunter reads the end of a chase. He stepped forward slowly, not rushing, not reckless, each step deliberate, as though he already knew the outcome and was simply walking toward it. Lena could feel the air change. It was no longer the tense stillness of two predators sizing each other up. It was the sharp electric pull of something inevitable about to happen. She wanted to look away, but her gaze was trapped by the sight of the human's steady approach. Reth shifted his footing, ready to defend if needed, but even he could sense the fight was no longer balanced. The predator's roar came again, low and hoarse, more defiance than power, and it lunged. But this time, the man did not evade completely. He moved just enough to let the claws pass by his side, while his blade came up in a rising slash that split through the soft tissue under its armored chest. The cut was clean but devastating. The ridgeback recoiled with a violent twist, its tail swinging blindly to catch him, but he ducked under the sweep, closing in again before it could reset its footing. His next strike carved deep into the already wounded forelimb, severing muscle and tendon. The beast collapsed, partially, its weight shifting awkwardly as it tried to support itself on the other legs. But the human was relentless, his movements now a storm of precision, each strike flowing from the last, leaving no pause for recovery. Blade flashed through the humid air, cutting at joints and weak points. The sound of steel against scale, sharp and quick. The ridgeback's roars grew more ragged with each blow, until they became shorter, sharper bursts of pain. The human drove forward with a speed that seemed to ignore the size difference between them, his body twisting around, every counterattack, his boots digging into the churned soil for balance, each movement faster than Lena's eyes could fully follow. He struck low at the hind legs, spinning past the beast's attempted bite, then slashed upward along the ribs where the armor plates had already been weakened. Green blood sprayed in arcs, staining his dark gear, but he did not slow. The ridgeback tried one last heavy swipe, its claws cutting deep into the ground where he had stood a moment before, and in the space left open, he stepped in, closed the blade, plunging deep into the base of its neck and dragging outward in a brutal tear. Predator screamed in a way that seemed to shake the ground, but the human had already moved on, yanking the blade free and spinning to cut across its flank, the motion so swift that the line of the cut appeared before Lena even realized the blade had moved again. Another strike, this one to the back of the hind leg, severing its ability to stand. The beast collapsed fully, now its massive body hitting the earth. with a dull, heavy impact, but the man did not stop. He was inside the arc of its desperate tail strike, now his blade driving into the thinner armor between its shoulder plates, twisting once and pulling free before slicing across the opposite side. It became a blur of movement, the predator thrashing, but each movement only opening new targets for the human's attacks. His strikes were not wild, they were placed with absolute control, like a craftsman dismantling a complex machine piece by piece. Muscle by muscle, tendon by tendon, the Ridgeback's movements slowed further, each roar weaker than the last, until its head sagged under its own weight, still alive, but unable to rise. Man stepped back just far enough to avoid a feeble snap of its jaws, then surged forward one final time, his blade coming down in a heavy, diagonal slash from shoulder to chest, cutting through armor and bone. As if they were nothing, the sound was deep and final. The predator's body shuddered once, twice, and then stilled. The clearing fell silent, except for the sound of the Kochi human's breathing, which was calm, steady, not the gasping of someone who had barely survived, but the measured breath of someone who had never doubted victory. Lena stood frozen, her mind trying to process what she had seen. The Ridgeback's body lay in pieces, its once unbreakable armor split apart like thin bark, green blood pooling across the churned ground. The human stood amid the wreckage of the beast, his blade still in hand, its surface slick with the predator's blood, but his expression unchanged, as though he had done nothing more than complete a routine task. He glanced at the creature once more, before wiping the blade clean on a strip of its fallen hide. Then sheathing it with a smooth, practiced motion, Riff lowered his weapon slowly, the tension in his frame loosening, but his antennae remained angled toward the human, as if still wary. Lena could feel her own pulse in her fingertips, the image of the fight burned into her mind, the sheer speed and precision, the way the man had turned something everyone feared into nothing more than a problem to be solved in moments. She had read about human adaptability, she had studied the data on their survival instincts, but seeing it here, watching one man dismantle the galaxy's most dangerous predator without armor or heavy weapons, was something else entirely. The human turned toward them, now his eyes clear, his voice calm, asking if they were hurt. Lena shook her head, still unable to find her voice. She realized that from the moment he stepped onto the path he had been in control. Not once had the predator forced him into a desperate defense. Not once had he looked unsure. It was not a lucky win. It was the deliberate, overwhelming dismantling of a creature that most armies would have avoided around them. The jungle slowly returned to life, the smaller creatures testing the edges of the clearing again, the distant calls of unseen animals filling the silence left by the Ridgeback's death. The man walked toward them, his movements as unhurried as when he had first appeared. Reth stepped aside to give him room, still watching with an expression that was not fear exactly, but something close to respect. Lena could not help but follow his path with her eyes, wondering who he was and how many more like him existed out there in the vast reach of human space. In the dirt behind him, the Ridgeback's shredded remains lay as proof of what had just happened, and Lena knew she would remember every second of it for the rest of her life. Lena could still smell the sharp metallic scent of the Ridgeback's blood in the warm air. It clung to the clearing, mixing with the scent of crushed plants and damp earth. Her heart had slowed, but her mind had not. It replayed the fight in fragments. The blur of movement, the flash of steel, the way the predator's body had come apart under the human strikes. She felt the weight of the silence that followed the battle, and it seemed heavier than the fight itself. The man stood there, blade sheathed, now his hands steady, his breathing calm, as if he had not just faced death and walked through it. Rith finally spoke, his voice low, asking how he had done it. There was no mocking in the tone, no disbelief, only the kind of question that comes from someone who has seen something beyond their understanding. The man looked at him, then at Lena, his eyes steady, and without boast he said that, on his homeworld, humans were never the strongest, not in the air, not in the water, not even on the ground. They were surrounded by predators larger, faster, stronger, and armed with weapons. Nature had given them claws, teeth, venom, speed, But humans had none of that, so they learned to think differently. They learned to watch and wait. They learned to fight not by matching strength, but by breaking. I said that what they had seen was not power in the way most understood it. It was the result of thousands of years of living where survival meant being able to take down something that should not be taken down, where you could not run forever and you could not hide forever, so you learned to end the threat before it ended you. Lena listened, her thoughts turning over the idea that such skill came not from machines or enhancements, but from the simple fact that humans had been forced to face danger with nothing but their own bodies and minds, and in doing so had become something other predators could not predict. The man's gaze drifted toward the jungle, as if listening to something distant, and Lena realized he was hearing what she could. Not the faint tremor of the ground, the shift in the jungle's distant calls. He told them more would come, maybe not right away, but they would be drawn to the scent and the sound. Ravs' antennae moved quickly, catching the same distant vibrations. The alien suggested they move back toward the ship, but the man shook his head, telling them to follow a different path, one that would keep them out of the predator's usual hunting trails. They moved together through the thick foliage, the man cutting a path with ease, his eyes scanning constantly, not just ahead but above and behind. Lena found herself watching the way he moved, not just his hands and feet, but how his entire body seemed aware of the space around him. It was like the jungle could not surprise him. Every step made sense, every pause had a reason. He never wasted motion. Ravs asked if he had fought creatures like the Ridgeback before, and the man nodded, saying the shapes changed, the sizes changed, the methods of attack changed, but the core was always the same. You find the weakness, you stay alive long enough to use it, and when the chance comes, you finish it completely. As they walked, Lena's fear of the jungle began to fade, replaced by an awareness that she was walking beside something dangerous in its own right, not dangerous to her, but to anything that decided to hunt her. She realized she had been wrong to think of humans as fragile. They were not built to dominate the way some apex predators were, but they had turned that weakness into something far more dangerous than brute force. Ravs seemed to share her thoughts, though. He kept his eyes forward, his usual guarded movements more relaxed now. They reached the edge of a ridge overlooking a wide valley, the jungle below rolling like a green sea. The man stopped there, scanning the horizon for a long moment, then turned to them and said they could make the drop to the valley floor and follow the stream back to the research outpost. It would be safer than staying near the Ridgeback's territory. Lena asked if he would come with them, but he only smiled faintly, saying his work here was not finished, and there were still things in the jungle that needed dealing with before they became a problem for anyone else. She wanted to ask more, wanted to know why he was here in the first place, why he had stepped in to save them, but he had already started moving along the ridge, his silhouette blending into the shadow of the trees, the sound of his steps fading quickly. Ravs gave a small nod, as if to say it was better not to press for answers. Some hunters did not hunt for reward or recognition. Some simply could not leave a threat alive once they had seen it. Lena watched until he disappeared into the green and the mist, then turned toward the valley, with Ravs the stream below catching glints of pale light through the leaves. She could still hear the echo of his words in her mind, and the memory of the fight still fresh, the image of the Ridgeback brought down not by overwhelming power, but by precision and patience, and something deeper, a will to face danger head on and walk away. By the time they reached the outpost, the suns were low, casting long shadows across the landing pads. The other researchers came out to meet them, their eyes widening when they saw the stains of Ridgeback blood across her boots and gear. They asked what had happened, and she told them enough to understand, but not everything, because there were parts of that fight that words could not hold, parts that would sound like exaggeration, even though she had seen them herself later that night as the jungle's distant sounds filled the air. She stood outside the habitat dome, looking toward the dark shape of the trees. Somewhere out there, the man was still moving through the shadows, still hunting, and she found herself thinking of the Ridgeback again, and how all the Council's data had called it the planet's apex predator. But now she knew the truth. An apex predator ruled only until something smarter and more relentless came along, and on that day in that clearing, she had seen exactly what that looked like. The name Apex, she thought, had never belonged to the Ridgeback at all. The end.